Excellent. Sorry, we are starting with a bit of delay. Thank you everyone for introducing yourselves, despite the fact that not everyone has introduced him or herself. But for the interest of time, we are going to go straight to the meeting of today. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished guest speaker today, Tony Leigh. He is a friend of mine, and we last met, I think, in Geneva last summer.
Yep.
Yeah, and he's going to be speaking about RSI, remote simultaneous interpreting platforms and challenges. But before that, I would like to ask some questions to Tony. So if I may ask you first question, how would you introduce yourself, Tony, to the public and the public here on this platform and outside? Perhaps the recording will be published, posted later on YouTube.
How would I introduce myself? Well, first of all, thank you very much all for being here. Thank you very much, Hammouda, for having invited me. I feel most flattered to be here today. And I would like to welcome you all. I presume that all of you are students of interpreting and translation. A lot of you have just said that you're doing master's degrees or whatever, but I presume in translation and interpreting. So obviously here I would introduce myself to you as a professional interpreter and translator. For your information, I've been working as a professional interpreter from 1986, so that's a few years now. And I must admit that everything that's going on at the moment is interesting, challenging, frightening, but also I think that it does present certain opportunities with regard to our future, our professional future. So I don't know if that's good enough to start with.
This is good enough. So are you happy with what you are doing and as a conference interpreter? Are you happy with your professional life as a conference interpreter, with its special style, special requirements, special challenges? So are you happy with that?
Yes, I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. I'm delighted with the job I do. It has many challenges, which is part of why I like it, because every day you are faced with new challenges. You have unique opportunities, windows into many worlds. I'm talking basically about working in the open market, not about working necessarily in the institutional market. I think that's a slightly different kind of concept to the work. But I very much enjoy the regularity, the fact that every day is different, the windows, as I say, that it opens on many, many different worlds, the scope it gives you to relate to people as well, because you know a little bit about many, many different subjects. So when you meet people at a party or on a train, on a plane or whatever, it's a fantastic tool for engaging them, because you can nearly always find something that you've done a conference on, that you've heard a talk on, that you've been working on, and through that you can connect with other people.
True. So what are the challenges in this professional industry?
Oh,
or some of them.
I was going to say the challenges are many. I mean, obviously, the biggest challenge is always the speaker. No, that's not at all true. I think actually the biggest challenges are often sound quality. And particularly now in the era of COVID, you know, I had an online translation the other day, an RSI translation, where the speaker was using a cordless house phone that was set about 2 meters away from him.
Oh.
So, you know, with all of the problems there are with the compressed sound through the internet and everything else, on top of that, you have to try and hear what the speaker is saying over a system where you can really just about make out that he's speaking. And then when you start translating, you can hardly hear him.
Yeah. So let's go to the beginning. Why did you choose this career, and what led you to this profession? Your beginnings.
My beginnings are long and dark.
Yes.
I really came to translating and interpreting by coincidence. I mean, life
Tell us the
brought me
story.
to it. Sorry?
Tell us the story.
Oh, I don't think we've got time. No, so I was born and brought up in North London. At school, I studied French. I did 13 years of French. French was my main language. And I was actually working in the world of music publishing after having worked in many different areas before going into that. And I got promoted. And when I was promoted, I decided that it was a really good job that I was promoted to. I was very young, and I thought, well, if I stay here, I'm going to get stuck in a rut. So I decided that I would give in my notice, something that the company didn't understand very well because they just promoted me. But I gave in my notice, went traveling. By a long and circuitous route, I eventually landed up in Spain, working in a completely different industry. I was working in the ski industry. While I was living up in the Pyrenees here in Spain, where I ended up living all year round, people little by little started asking me if I could do translating work for them, written translation. I found that it was something that I enjoyed, I liked. And when I moved down to Barcelona, which was in 1984, and decided that I was going to go freelance in 1986, before that, sat the British Institute and British Guild of Linguists exams in translation and interpreting, and then launched myself freelance from there. And don't feel like I've ever really looked back, despite some of the awful periods we've been through over the last 30 years, you know. You're muted, Hammouda.
So tell us now about the challenges of RSA.
Well, they are also diverse. Once again, obviously, the issue of sound is the main issue that we have, although I have also had issues with the video feed doing RSI interpreting, where particularly if you're doing something that you haven't, been provided with any kind of presentation beforehand, you just get the presentation shown straight away. So you're working from the presentation, and when you can't read it at all, and this was a fairly technical subject that I was doing, it really did make it very difficult. So the quality of the image, the quality of the sound, then of course we have all of the issues involved with working from the screen, which obviously it's been shown that there's a far greater cognitive load. We're not only interpreting, we're handling a technological platform at the same time. There are cases when we have to be handling more than one platform at the same time, and also using Google to look up stuff, or whatever, or watching the presentation on a third screen, a third device. So all of that makes it far more complex. There are different issues also involved with the different platforms that are around. They are all works in progress. They are continuously being adapted and changed to fit the new situation, because very few people actually anticipated that we would be needing them so much as we do now. Some of the ones that have been around for longer are a little further down the road, but you know, it's very much something that is being made as we go along.
True. Okay, let's take questions from the participants. So please,
Delighted.
yeah, by showing that hand icon.
Somebody should break the ice.
Should, yeah. Yes.
There we go.
Iman. Shaki, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question concerning the RSI, mainly the fatigue. If we usually work for half an hour in face-to-face interpretation, this is rather hard with RSI, especially if it's a technical topic. So, and I have heard as well through different webinars that we can't, that through RSI we wouldn't have a fully fledged working day. It wouldn't be 8 hours. It could be 2 hours, then 1 hour break, and then 2 hours with 2 interpreters, if not more, for a whole day in the working day. So how can we handle the fatigue, manage the techno stress, given that there may be some technical glitches while working? Indeed. And given that perhaps there would be no technical support.
Thank you very much for that question, Iman. It is a very good question, and one of the big issues that there is at the moment with RSI. The question of fatigue, I agree. I think, though, that we must remember that the fatigue is not only suffered by us. We do suffer fatigue, and we have different sources of cognitive load which the participants don't have. But likewise for the participants, I think really and truly when you extend beyond an hour and a half, their attention span has disappeared. So I think that, you know, really an hour and a half, stretching it 2 hours maximum. For we the interpreters, I think that rather than the idea which, you know, with face-to-face meetings was the norm more or less, between 25 minutes, 30 minutes each to change over regularly. When we're doing RSI commissions, I think that what we need to do is change every 15, 20 minutes maximum. So, as I say, to have shorter sessions, I think maybe 2 1.5 hour sessions in one day would be the most that anyone would be capable of actually retaining. And then as far as the interpreters are concerned, switching every 10, 15 minutes.
How about pricing now? Are there new norms of pricing now? Is it a full day assignment? For example, if it is a session of 2 hours, how do you price it?
Okay, this is purely my own take. There's a lot of controversy around the issue of pricing. There are people in the profession who believe that fees should be increased by about 25%. There are people who think the fees should be the same. There are people who think fees should be lower. There are people who think we should charge an hourly rate. I am radically against the concept of charging an hourly rate. I think what we need to do, because the whole concept has changed a little, and I think what we need to do is to charge per project and not necessarily per job. And by that I mean oftentimes now, something we never used to have to do, but we now have to attend rehearsals for meetings. And that can often be actually longer than the meetings. I mean, I've had schedules for an hour-long meeting with 3 hours of rehearsal. So all of this has to be included in the package. I think that we are also, to an extent, and I'm sorry, man, there was a question that you asked there that I didn't answer. To an extent, we're having to be our own sound technicians, we're having to keep an eye on the technology, the platforms, making sure that we're doing all of the things we should do, traditional things like using the right channel and having the microphone on, things like that. Yes, and what you were saying, Iman, you asked about the sound technician aspect. That will depend on the platform. There are a lot of the platforms which actually do have a sound technician that is present. If you work from a hub, there will also be a sound technician who will be present and on the job. So anyway, hope that's answered the question, Hammouda.
Does. We have another question from Wisal Khalifi. Please.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Tony, for being here with us today. I actually have two questions. So to start with, you know, in remote interpreting, you can't always read the body language. And so how does that impact the interpreting process, knowing that body language in itself should be translated somehow, you know? And second, COVID has proven that it's possible nowadays to have similar catastrophes happening. And so, what is the future of interpreting from now on? And in case the world, God forbid, in case the world would someday face some similar catastrophes, how would that impact interpreting? And like COVID aside, what possible challenges do you expect this domain, you know, in the near future? And thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, the second question is quite a large one. And I'm not quite sure how I could answer about how a future catastrophe could affect the world of interpreting. But body language is a very important element of any job that we're doing. I think that when working at face-to-face meetings, if there is the opportunity, I will always attempt to meet with the speaker, make the speaker aware of the interpreters, get to learn a little bit about their body language, the way their brain works, the way they speak. And in the interpreting, it's a huge element, a very important element. Normally speaking, in my experience working on virtual platforms, you normally get a very small, corner where you can see the speaker, and it's very hard to read their body language. So that indeed is a tool that we are losing in remote simultaneous interpreting. I really don't know how to answer how we could face a future catastrophe. I don't know, what kind of catastrophe you could be envisaging. What I can say is that I think with, COVID lockdown, people have started moving, developing things, working out ways to carry on very, very quickly. And I think that something similar would happen. As humans, we are enormously, even though we don't believe it ourselves, adaptable. It's very easy for things to become a new normal, and I suppose that's what would happen.
Good. Yeah. Any other question?
I have a question.
Okay. Who is speaking, please?
Iman.
Iman, please go ahead, Iman.
Sorry to bother you again.
No problem. Go ahead.
Well, I have two questions actually. First, there are expected technical glitches while working, with the remote simultaneous interpreting. This may happen. So do you think it would be a good idea to include this in the contract? To determine the liability of both parties, the interpreter vis-a-vis the client? This is the first part of my question. The second relates to the RSI. Given the COVID situation at present, no one could determine how long it would take. It may take 6 months, it may take a year, perhaps less, perhaps more. So if we assume that we are going to go back to normal, do you think that RSI would still be an integral part of the interpretation profession? Thank you.
Two excellent questions there,
yeah.
man. Thank you very much. Definitely, we need to contractually establish the limits of liability of all of the parties involved. As you say, there are still frequent technical glitches, things go wrong. You have cases, as I was saying, with where you lose the video feed, or where the video feed is blurry so you can't see the screen. If you're working, for example, at an AGM where they're reeling off figures, and you can't see the screen, then you're in trouble. Then, with regard to the future of RSI, I think RSI has a long and very happy future before it. I believe that, it's something which was used on a very small scale up to now. More often than not, it was used in the form of hybrid meetings where you would have some speakers who would maybe stream in, or that was normally the extent of it. But I think now a lot of firms have seen that they can actually operate with video conferencing techniques using simultaneous interpreting through the different platforms. And indeed, at the moment, for example, I'm now doing work with a company that I've been working with for many years. We used to do road shows in their particular area. And in a road show that would last 5 days would involve a team of maybe between 8 and 10 people traveling from one venue to another, the cost of all of the technical equipment, setting up, and in the course of a week, we would maybe reach out to 180 of their very good customers. Now they've seen that using RSI virtual venues, they are able in an hour's talk to reach out to 600, 700, 800 customers. And I don't think that that's something that they're going to let go of. I believe it will coexist. It will be another option that we will have. And I believe that it does have a very long, very, very, very happy and fruitful future. And I believe we will indeed, when we come out of COVID and when face-to-face meetings start again, have more work than we did before.
Excellent. I have another question, Tony, about the platforms.
Okay.
What are the platforms that you have tried? And can you just briefly say what advantages and the disadvantages of the platforms you have tried?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, because I think with the platforms, we all have our own experience of them. And I think that the different platforms are, to an extent, suited to different uses.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't, put my hand in the fire and say, oh, such and such a platform is fantastic, don't use that one, it's useless. I think that from what I've seen, all of the platforms work one way or another. I think that the platform that people seem to be using more and more for simultaneous interpreting, which is Zoom, has a whole series of problems involved with it. In general, the quality of the sound and image is very good. The ability to share screens and things is good. You can see the screen and you can see the speaker at the same time. However, with the interpreting module that they've very hastily pieced together,
Yeah.
to work with Zoom, you have major issues such as not
Sure.
being able to hear your colleague in the booth, so you can't hear your booth partner. Handover is very tricky because, again, you can't see or hear your booth partner, your fellow interpreter. And also, I think one of the very important functions that we have in the booth is, when we're not working, to help our booth mate. So to pass them notes, to take note of figures, if there are weird acronyms, to go and look them up, find out what's, and so on and so forth. All of that you can't really do very well because you can't hear the speaker. There are ways around it. There are fixes. Yes, you can have another device where you have you are attending the meeting as a delegate. That way you can hear the translation when your colleague is translating. But then the more devices that you're operating while you're working, the more dispersed you're going to be and the less able you're going to be to concentrate. Of the other platforms, I've worked mostly with Interprify, and Interprify, I think, on the whole works pretty well. There are glitches. I've heard of problems with all of the platforms. I've seen Interactio, which again is very much a work in progress. Things appear and disappear from it. They're adding this now, and then they're adding that, and then they're taking that away, and they're fixing it because then that clashes with the other. But I think that, you know, they do serve different purposes. I think that if you have just a short conference on its own, a 45-minute conference, and it's just going to be one person working on that, then Zoom is perfectly adequate. If you're holding a meeting with 500 delegates, 10 different languages, then Zoom is not the tool that you want. You would then probably go to one of the bigger platforms such as Interactio or Interprify, Kudo, and use those because they have the ability to cope with those situations.
We have another request from Ahmed Badran and then Amin Fajri. Ahmed, please.
Hi, Ahmed.
Hello, Ahmed. So let's move to Amin.
Okay.
Amin.
Right. Thank you so much. And I mean, with the COVID-19 outbreak, we as interpreters are seeking new work opportunities. So the remote interpreting, remote simultaneous interpreting, the RSI, sound like a magic formula to reach out to a large client base. My questions are, what skill, actually I have 4 questions, and Dr. Salhi told us that you're good in note-taking, so so first one is, what skill set and technical equipment do I need to cope with the RSI successfully? Question 2 is, why do conference interpreters have an edge in RSI? Question 3, what types of communicative events are most suitable for remote simultaneous interpreting? And final question is, how do I train my brain to get started in RSA? Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure if I understand your second question.
So why do conference interpreters have an edge in remote?
Yes, who else is going to do it?
Correct, yeah.
That was, I mean, so yes, I mean, it could only be conference interpreters that are doing it. I don't think you're going to get somebody who's a literary translator all of a sudden being able to do simultaneous interpreting. I think the differences are exactly the same as they are with face-to-face. Skill set and technical equipment. Okay, thank you, by the way, I mean, for your questions, sorry. Yes. Skill set, I mean, in terms of language abilities, exactly the same as when you're working at a face-to-face meeting. I think that you need to be able to prepare properly. You need to have decent background documentation before you start. You need to make up your glossaries. You need to make sure that you are au fait with the jargon, the terminology of the field that you're going to be working in. Then, of course, on top of being able to do that, you have to have a rudimentary skill in terms of handling IT equipment. I mean, you don't need to be by any means an IT engineer, but you do need to be able to coordinate, to find your way around a computer, to be able to load up different applications and so on and so forth. Technical equipment, from my experience, I would strongly recommend having apart from the laptop that you're working with, ideally, if you can have another computer and maybe a third screen available, you need to have somewhere that you can work from which is reasonably soundproofed. You need to make sure that when you're working, you have your landline telephone off the hook, your mobile phone is silenced. If you can, you switch off your doorbell. You give the neighbor's dog a lot of food so that it's asleep. And then you need to have a computer which has a fast processor. Normally, for most of the platforms, they demand a minimum of 8 megabytes of RAM. And you should have, ideally, for most of the platforms, a USB headset with a microphone with noise cancellation. And then apart from that, the rudimentary tools that we always use, a pen, a notepad, some water, and that's it. Really, apart from that, it's all very much the same as it was. In terms of the kind of events that RSI is good for, I repeat, as I said before, the events should be short. It is not suited to all-day events. That is impossible. Unless you're talking about an all-day event where people are drifting out of one room into another, as they would do in a big medical congress or something where you have 15 different rooms and 20 satellite meetings going on, and so people are flowing in and out. But I would say that retention time is very short. I think the kind of event really can vary just as much as it does when we're working, face to face. Maybe AGMs, that sort of thing, is maybe not so good because a lot of corridor work goes on there. But courses, information exchanges, latest developments in whatever field, all of that, fine. Brain training, the same as when you're working face to face. I wouldn't say that there is anything different there. You have to get used to being still sat down in front of a screen for long periods of time. But that's it.
Thank you. Ahmed Badran, please can you unmute yourself?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hammouda. Thank you, Mr. Tony, for such interesting webinars and meetings. Actually, I was about to ask the same question which asked by Mr. Hammouda, but I will add something. During this period of COVID-19, I think we have noted that there is many platforms for interpreting. For myself, I'm familiar with like 2 or 3 of these platforms. But from your own experience, did you face any difficulties of using one of these platforms, or did you think if there is any problem happen with interpreter, he can use alternatives for time being?
Okay.
Can we take 2 or 3 more questions, if it is possible?
Okay. Do you want me to answer this one first, or take the other questions and then
Perhaps
answer them
take
all?
other questions?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Wael Ben Ali, and then Ines Hajri. Wael.
Hello, Mr. Tony.
Hi.
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 Sorry, what was your name? I'm sorry.
Wael Ben Ali.
Well, okay.
Well, actually, this is not a question, but it's a personal experience, or I would like to call it a difficult situation. and I want to know, what would a professional interpreter like you do if you were in my shoes?
Okay.
Well, actually, I'm working, I am a member of project coordinators. We work with a group of British people related to the British embassy. And one day they had a problem, they called us, we went, everything was normal. Normally, I used to talk to their leader. His name is Chris. But that day I didn't find Chris. I found someone else. I went to talk to him. and he was actually able to spell more than 20 words per second. I didn't understand anything. He speaks really, really fast, and I was completely lost. So I told him, I waited him to finish his conversation. I didn't understand any word. And then I asked him to call Chris, the guy I used to talk with him. And when Chris came, actually, it's really funny. Tim is speaking in English. Chris speaks English and translate to me in English. And then I translate to the Tunisian guy in Arabic.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Well, Ines Hajri. So it is a comment rather than a question.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Okay, good. Hello, Sir Johnny.
Hi.
My question, what has changed in your habits as an interpreter after COVID? And what we already talked about, what do you do when someone talks too fast? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ines.
Thank you. Iman again. Iman Shakib.
Sorry, but I have many questions. This is just one. This is just one question.
Please, yes.
Well, this has to do with the education of the client.
Very important.
Because I mean, I'm from Egypt, so if we talk about the Egyptian market, many of the service providers wouldn't have an idea which would be the most appropriate platform, and many of them would tend to use Zoom because it's, common.
Yes.
So if they, let's cite an example. Let's say they choose Zoom. Would it be as an interpreter, would I tell them about the pros and cons of such a platform? Or would I advise other platforms that I have used and found that they are more appropriate? For instance, in Zoom, there is no relay. So how could we work about this issue? And the handover, as you said, it's not that facile.
Yeah.
So is it part of our duty as interpreters to try to educate the client, or we provide them with a list of platforms and then they make their own choice?
Yes, just and to complement this question, whether the interpreter is also called to act as a technical advisor to the client, means to be having so many hats. So is it the job of the interpreter to do that?
Yeah,
over to you, Tony. Yes.
Excellent question. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. Ahmed then. Yes, and I think that I've kind of inferred this, I've implied this, excuse me, before with what I was saying. There are problems with all of the platforms. Things go wrong. A lot of it is basically beta technology that has been rolled out before it's fully developed. And there are issues. Again, going back to what was asked before, I think the question here is making sure that in your contract you have the appropriate disclaimers, you clearly define where the limits are to the liability of all of the players in the chain, rather in the same way as occurred with face-to-face meetings, but now we have maybe a few more imponderables and things that we have great difficulty in being able to control. So yes, and there are problems with all of the platforms. None of them are fail-safe. So obviously, this maybe just a quick side note here, and something that hasn't been asked about or talked about. I see that Iman has actually asked the question in the chat. So I would say that what we need to do, and linking up with the last question here, is to be able to offer a full range of services that will adapt to the need of the individual meeting. So I would say that in terms of priority, always we should favor face-to-face meetings when we are, again, all able to hold face-to-face meetings. Following that, the next option would be to work from a hub, and the last option would be to work from home. I think that working in a hub has many advantages. You know that you will have a redundant broadband line. You know that you will have a UPS or some alternative, a generator, some alternative source of power, so that your service is going to be continuous. There won't be any breakdown on that front. And then you are going to somewhere which is a place of work. Here, I'm in my home. Even though I'm in a room where I can be left alone, it's relatively quiet. Things can happen. I have all of my domestic objects around me, which remind me, oh goodness, I didn't take the rubbish out. When I finish doing this, I'm going to have to take the rubbish out. You go to work in a hub, you are switched into work mode and you focus much better. So that aside. Wales question and comment. Yes, speed is a big issue. It's no different now to in the presential physical world. There are always people who speak extremely fast, whatever the language. We have to do the best we can. We develop different coping mechanisms. There are interpreters who run the risk of summarizing. I find that myself a dangerous path to follow, because then you are assuming that you can understand what the speaker is talking about, which oftentimes we don't necessarily understand what the speaker is talking about. Ines, new habits. Well, one new habit is you only have to dress on the top half of your body. The bottom half doesn't count. I would say very few really. Discipline yourself to always use an Ethernet connection. Never rely on Wi-Fi. Even though you're at home, make sure that you are alert. You have as few distractions around you as possible. And that's it, really. And then with the last question that Iman asked, which I think is a highly pertinent question, I think that just like when we're talking about face-to-face, a very important part of our job is to educate the customer, because many customers, it's a bit like a builder. It's not something that you do every day. You know, you have a builder in doing serious building work in your house a couple of times in a lifetime. So what you need when you hire a builder is somebody who is going to be able to give you good, solid advice that you can depend on. In the case of simultaneous interpreting, I believe that, yes, it is our duty to find out as much as we can about the different platforms, know the pros and cons of these platforms, have an idea of the pricing as well, and to be able to recommend the most appropriate solution to our customer. Again, I think we have to change mindset a little, and what we have to offer the customer is now a project rather than just the interpreting service. We're offering a little bit more. Oh, the handover
we have
you asked about.
a
Sorry,
request
relay.
from
Sorry.
Professor Mohammed Al-Mansouri. Would you like to step in? Yes, go ahead, please. I cannot see the icon of the hand, the blue hand. Yeah, yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
we can.
Okay. Good afternoon to everyone. This is just a question related to the training of facilitators. You know, you have a moderator or you have a facilitator on the other side. When you were booked for the first RSI assignment, what were the things that you agreed with the facilitator, if you had the opportunity to discuss with a facilitator or a moderator of the meeting?
Yes, it's a good question, and I think, again, it's something that we should always try and do. If, as you so rightly say, we get the occasion to be able to do so. That is definitely not always the case. I think that one of the very important things that we need to do is to make sure that everybody who is speaking at a meeting is using a decent microphone with a decent headset, and has done everything possible to ensure that the sound is as clear and pure as possible. That, I think, is one of the main priorities when we're talking. I have customers now who have decided that the best thing for them to do is to invest 60, 70, 80 euro in a decent headset and send that to the speakers for the meeting. And I think that that is a very good policy. I think that if possible, and not all of the platforms permit this, it is a very good idea if the questions, if there's a Q&A session, appear in the chat box as well, so that if there are problems, I've had the case with a very intense webinar with a lot of questions, a lot of discussion at the end of the meeting. The moderator was reading the questions. The moderator was using a very low quality cell phone headset with microphone built in, and the questions were virtually unintelligible. And I'm very pleased to say that the speakers themselves didn't understand the questions, so they couldn't blame the interpreting for the questions being unintelligible. So I think that's a vital thing, to try and make sure that people are using decent equipment.
Thank you. Yeah, Taqwa Jandoubi and then Salwa El Battout. Taqwa.
Hello, sir. Thank you for accepting Dr. Hammouda's invitation. We are really honored to have you here today. So my question is as following. Cognitive load is something that both beginners and professional interpreters face. But however, I mean, professional interpreters cope easier with that cognitive load. So is there a practical solution for that? Thank you.
Thank you. And Salwa?
Hello, I'm Salwa Al-Battout, conference interpreter. Hi. In the normal conferences and the meetings, many bilingual interpreters use the relay system to hand over simultaneous interpretation when there is a person who speaks a third language the interpreter doesn't speak. So do you think that this system of relay system will continue with using the RSI mode? And is this depend on the platform the interpreter can use? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Over to you, Tony, to answer these two questions.
So, cognitive load. I think that, you know, it's, if you like, a little similar to when you're training for athletics or whatever. Your tolerance hopefully will grow. You will be able to take a greater and greater cognitive load as your experience increases. I think that, you know, you find, obviously, the more experience you have, the more ways you have of getting round issues that there maybe will be with the sound quality, the speakers, sometimes incoherence, all of that sort of issue. I think that there's no difference really in terms of the way we handle cognitive load between face-to-face and RSI. However, with RSI, we are subject to greater cognitive load for the different reasons that we've already discussed. So I think that it's important just to switch more frequently, even if it's down to every 10 minutes, to switch with your booth mate. I think that would be the best thing. In terms of your question, Salwa, about relay, Yes, it's largely down to the platform. As we all know, there's no relay on Zoom. The only way that you can get relay on Zoom is by having another device and participating as a delegate on the other device, so that way you can hear the different language translation, so you can pick up on the language that you're interested in. Obviously, that is a patched together, not satisfactory solution, and the most satisfactory solution would be to use a platform which does offer relay, which the more expensive platforms all do, as does Interactio, and some of the other smaller platforms. So in that case, it is a platform-related issue, and we have to know how to recommend to our customer the right platform. In my experience, I think that there are going to be fewer and fewer multi-language meetings which are carried out virtually, but when there are, we need to have relay, most definitely.
Any other question? Yes. Okay. Tony, about project-based assignments. The client or the customer might argue that this is a, for example, a 2-hour assignment, and you are working from home, so you are not going to miss the opportunity of working or carrying out other assignments on the same day. How would you convince the client to accept this new method of contracting you based on the project and not based on the hours or the days?
Well, the assumption, and that's a very good question, Hammouda, the assumption is that, normally speaking, you are not, your work is not going to be limited to the time that you're actually working on the meeting. So normally speaking, either you will have to connect an hour, hour and a half, in some cases 2 or even 3 hours before the meeting is scheduled to start, or you connect 45 minutes, 50 minutes before the meeting starts, but the previous day you've maybe had a 2-3 hour rehearsal, so that they're trying out all of the different services they're using, they're testing the streaming, they're testing the translation over the streaming, they're testing the projection. So I think that when we're setting a project, that is what we're talking about. I think the arguments...
Sorry, Tony, perhaps he or the client might argue this is the beginning, this is the testing period, and it is expected that we are going to spend some time in the testing and the rehearsal and so on, but later on, the interpreter will have experience, the moderator will have experience, and the participants, and there will be no need for that rehearsal, or we will not be losing time.
At the moment, I think that day is a long way away, because a lot of the testing is actually on the technical side, but they want us to be there. So, you know, even though we're not translating, it is taking up our time and preventing us from doing other work. So I would still argue that. I would also argue, Hammouda, that just as is the case now, when we get, you know, just a short conference to translate, where we would, on a face-to-face basis, you know, go to a venue, translate a 40-minute talk, and that's it, our work is over. A lot of it depends on the intensity, the difficulty of the subject, how much learning that's meant for us. I mean, the most extreme case that I've ever had was a 40-minute talk, which I literally spent 10 days preparing for. So, you know, we need to be able to, again, educate our customers to make them understand the work and the involvement that there is, the fact that even if you have one short job, if it is very intense, requires great concentration, it's probably not a good idea to take a second job on the same day, because probably our minds are so, well ensconced in that subject matter, in that area, that if we go on to something else, we're not going to be able to devote our full attention to it. I agree that there are issues with this, that there will be customers that are saying, well, yeah, you're working at home. I mean, what's the big deal? You can be there with your feet up. You don't have to go anywhere. So, but we also have to point out to the customer that they are saving tremendously on travel, on per diems, on hotels. There's a huge difference for the customer. And I think that it's important for them not just to assume that that's it, we're going to be there, translate, and that's it. It's all over just with the 40 minutes that we're there translating for. Just as is the case now when we're justifying our fees to customers. They need to understand the experience, the background work that goes into any job, the fact that we're not just charging for the time that we're present for. So,
thank you. Any other question from the floor? So there is a question by Amin. Zoom platform does not have, unfortunately, a channel for Arabic. I'm wondering why. So perhaps it's a rhetorical question.
I think so. I mean, Zoom, as I understand it at the moment, will currently work on up to 8 channels.
True.
And I think that you can assign the languages.
Yeah. Can I comment on this?
Yes, Iman, please.
Allow me.
Go ahead.
It doesn't have Arabic as a label, but it has 5 different languages.
Yeah.
So Arabic could be interpreted under Chinese, for instance.
Yeah, but Iman,
we've done this. Arabic.
Not Arabic, but we've done this. I had a assignment with Libyan participants, and we created 2 channels, English and Japanese for Arabic. But then participants lost much time looking for the Arabic channel, which they will not find. But again, there was some confusion. Again, despite the fact that the directions were very clear that here it is the Japanese channel to replace the Arabic channel, but there was some confusion. And the Arabs and the Arabic participants really missed a great deal of the at least the introductory remarks due to that challenge related to the channel. Iman or Tony, perhaps.
Yeah, I really I'm afraid that I have no comment on it. I don't know about it, and I don't understand why they don't have a label for it. Which is, I mean, because Arabic is certainly one of the main languages that is used in translation. So I'm sorry, I can't comment on that.
Other platforms have Arabic.
Yeah,
I mean, voiceover, you would find Arabic, and you'd find relay as well. Kudu has Arabic. I mean, so there are other platforms that have, but if there is confusion for the participants, I think that, as you have mentioned, Mr. Hammouda, that right from the beginning you direct them that there is no label Arabic, and you tell them it's under Japanese. Sure. There is no other way to do it.
But you know, some people, you may make the announcement in the beginning, and some people might come late, and then so you know the conference setting and the environment is not always as we think. So there are always some exceptions. Thank you. So Salwa El Batut.
Yes, I have a question about the at-site interpretation or translation online. What are the conditions I have to apply when I receive an offer asking me to translate a text, a legal text, for example, online 30 minutes before the meeting? What I can do in this condition?
Not take the assignment.
Exactly. That is what I did.
I think it's going to depend a lot in that case on your relationship with the customer. If it's a customer that you've worked with for many years, they provide a lot of work for you, you know that this is an exception, then yes, I would certainly try to work to keep my customer happy. However, if it were a spontaneous, somebody who's just picked up my name from a website or from LinkedIn or whatever, I think I would refuse the assignment because it wouldn't be worth the professional risk.
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. Yes, thank you,
You
Sarah.
are right.
Sarah Talbi, go ahead, please.
Yes, Sarah Tabli. Thank you, sir.
Hi, Sarah.
First of all, thank you, Tony, sir, for sharing your experience with us. It's great. Thank you. We are learning so much. So it's not a question, actually. I want to ask for an advice, please. Being a beginner and looking for being a good translator or even being a good interpreter, I think one of the main problems is confidence, self-confidence. I think being in only thinking being in front of people or something like that, it makes me nervous. So would you what would an expert give a beginner as an advice to improve their self-confidence?
I think what is fundamental is preparation. If you are in the fortunate position of being able to have decent background documentation, stuff that is really related to what you're going to be doing in the meeting, it changes radically. There's a very clear example that comes to mind for me. Many years ago, they were just introducing a concept in computing which is called fuzzy logic. I don't know if any of you will have encountered it. It was a very new leading edge subject, particularly related to a lot of industrial machinery, processing systems, that sort of thing. I also do some written translation, although now very little. And about a week before I had this meeting on industrial meteorology, I received a text to translate. Excuse me, just one second. Sorry. I received a text to translate on the subject of fuzzy logic. It was a detailed treatise on fuzzy logic. It was about 60 pages long, and I learned a tremendous amount about fuzzy logic. And then I had this meeting, and the main subject for the whole meeting was fuzzy logic, something which 2 weeks before I'd never even heard mentioned. But because I'd done this translation, I'd done all of the research for the translation, I was really king of the show because I knew all about it, I knew all the terminology. So preparation, I think, is the best way of overcoming a lack of confidence when you're starting to interpret. Aside from that, normal things, sort of avoid drinking lots of coffee, have things that are going to calm you down, drink chamomile tea, that sort of thing, and believe in yourself. Know that you can do it. Know that you have the language skills you need. And as you've prepared properly, you're going to know about the subject that you're going to be talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Yes. So I have another question, Tony, related to traveling. If you are working online now as an interpreter, you will be deprived of the advantages of being there on the spot, watching, seeing everything in the environment, and learning and trying to infer the context from the contextual cues meaning, the meaning there, because sometimes meaning is not in the statement that is pronounced, but in the environment, in the context. You can understand more. You will be deprived of this, and traveling, perhaps we are we will be will find difficulty in speaking later about a traveling interpreter. So in this sense, the interpreter will be like a translator, working only online, receiving the text, translating, and sending it back to the client. Here, in this sense, the conference interpreter has had the advantage of receiving first-hand knowledge, first-hand exposure to meaning, to the context.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see now the life of the professional interpreter without that exposure, and whether the profession of interpreting will be reduced to just like a profession of translating?
Okay, it's a very, very pertinent question, and I think that this is obviously something that with remote interpreting we are deprived of. There are many, as you say, stimuli which are present in the atmosphere, in the tone of voice that's used, the way people look at each other, the posters that are stuck up around, the posters shows, all the rest of it. There's many other ways that we can get information when we go and work face-to-face at a meeting. It's different. I think that, again, like with body language, we are reduced in terms of the different cues that we have to work from. So I'd say there's very little that we can do about that. There are now virtual venues which are trying to offset that to a degree, where you get more of the feeling of being in a meeting, where you'll have a poster room, you'll have breakout rooms, you'll have an area where the delegates can get together, they can book an appointment and get together and have a chat, so they've got their little chat rooms and things. And I mean, it would be great, although I don't think this happens yet, if as interpreters we were to have the ability to wander around these different places just like we do. I don't know about you, Hammouda, but you know, I will always take a wander around the poster room, go and look at the different companies that have got their stands at the meeting, that are trying to sell their produce or whatever. We just have to basically adapt to the new context. I can't see any other way around that.
Thank you. Any other question? Professor Mansouri, do you want to take the floor?
No, just for a small comment on a translation that comes at the last minute. Of course, the right attitude is not to do the assignment, you know, to reject it politely, of course, and tactfully. But there are rates for rapid translation that, you know, certain people apply. And there's also a question that I saw there on the screen. It was a text question on whether there are different fees for RSI assignments. I believe that it is common among interpreters who do this to charge something like 20% more with regard to the usual fee. So that's my input. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I agree. I think that in terms of rates, I participate in a forum of freelance interpreters, and I think in general, although the opinion over the weeks has gone one way and another, I think on average people were saying that there should be a 20% hike in prices in the rates that we're charging. Although now I think it has swung back to at least keeping rates the same as they are, because the customers are arguing a lot against increasing our rates. They don't quite understand it. But yes, and then when you say a last-minute translation, I assume you mean an interpreting assignment.
Sorry, he meant the translation. I think Iman raised the point, or someone else, that she received a job of written translation while doing simultaneous interpreting.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood that then. Yes, I mean, this is a question of our priorities. I think that I always try to avoid rush jobs if possible, but it depends on the relationship that you have with your customer. If it's a very good customer, somebody who you want to keep happy, you want to make sure that you keep them working with you and not using other people, then you're going to do everything you can to try and satisfy the needs of your customer.
Yeah, thank you. Any other question? Salwa? And then Amin. Please.
Yes. Please, do you think that the number of conferences and online conferences and meeting will be less in number than the conferences and meetings held in normal circumstances? Do you think that the number will be less than the conferences and meetings in which we work in the normal circumstances, not in the COVID-19 circumstances?
Okay.
No, Salwa, I think it will be the opposite. I think we will have, maybe not immediately, but in the long term, I think we're going to have more work, more meetings than we had before.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Amin.
Thank you. The question actually just was posted on the chat about rates and fees. As we know, with COVID-19 right now, we're getting less assignments and income basically decreased. So should this impact the fees we're charging for the RSI conferences? We know that most of them will not go over 3 hours, and as Dr. Salhi mentioned, that a lot of things also will not be included. I mean, the travel time and other things. So one of my colleagues actually thought of reducing fees, which I disagree with, because what if after the COVID-19, I mean, you cannot go back to the same fees. And second question is just for the equipment. You mentioned that we need good noise canceling equipment for such a new environment. I was wondering if you do have any recommendations concerning headsets, microphones, for example, or thank you.
Okay. Yes, I fully agree with you. I mean that under no circumstances should we reduce our fees. I am very radically against charging per hour rates. As I say, I think that we need to work by project. I think that the customer does have to understand that the work that we're doing is exactly the same. It doesn't matter whether we're at home, whether we are at the North Pole. The workload that we have is exactly the same. In fact, now with RSI, as we were saying at the beginning, our cognitive load is greater, we have more stress, so certainly not. No, I think fees should be at least held the same, if not increased. In terms of specific recommendations, I think that you can find detailed information online, which has been issued by the different international interpreting associations on recommendations for equipment. I mean, you know, the headsets that you can get, you just need to make sure that they have active noise cancellation, that they are comfortable because you're going to be wearing them for a long time. And apart from that, anything that you know, you see in the recommendations is good, and probably a lot of things that are not there. I personally do not like the concept of having a table mic. There are some interpreters who are working with RSI with a table mic. I think that you're running more of a risk. You can knock it over, you can spill water on it, you can move your computer and it makes a horrible noise through the microphone. I think the best solution is a lightweight, good quality headset with a stalk microphone. I couldn't really recommend anything in terms of specific brands. So that's, yeah. And then, as I say, with the IT side of things, I think if you can, you need to have at least one other device or a separate screen that you can use for reference. Normally, you're going to want to have the interpreting platform full screen on your main screen. So if you have a second or even a third screen, it's very good because you can use it for your Google searches, you can use it for the chat box and things, and on your main screen you focus just on the platform as if it were the console in the booth.
Excellent. Yes. Any other question? I think. Yes.
We've exhausted them, you see.
Yeah, there is Shaima. Shaima, perhaps this is the last question. Yes, Shaima,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So my question is, did it ever happen to you to be blocked in the booth? I mean, you're hearing what the speaker is saying, but you can't interpret it, and you just get blocked. What do you do then?
We are all in the lockdown now.
Yeah. And I mean, this is not obviously RSI related, just general interpreting. I don't know what you may have to say on this, Hammouda, but normally, and thank God, when you are blocked, it normally tends to be something that lasts for milliseconds, and then you either just get it straight away, or you can use a verbal crutch that will carry you over that period until it comes back to you, and then off you go again. What about you, Hammouda? How do you tackle that situation?
It is the same story, yeah. So, so, you know, interpreters have some tricks sometimes just to gain some time until something coming to your mind. So this way, and perhaps I throw out the question to Professor Mansouri. Again, how do you act in this situation?
Yes, this I believe is a common thing to starting in particular. If you have a good, a good interpreter in the booth, someone who is sympathetic, someone you can, lean on when you have a passing problem, then that really helps a lot.
Yes.
And I believe that a good relationship in the booth is key to this. Because, you know, we, at a later stage and after experience, sometimes we're lost. You know, we hear a term and we don't make sense of it, or someone is a difficult speaker, because we have people that we call difficult speakers, and we really prepare when they take the floor with a lot of anxiety when that particular person takes the floor. So if you have a good teammate who is alert enough to be there supporting you, this, I believe, is a recipe for recovery.
Very
Excellent.
good point.
Very good
Yes.
point indeed. Yeah,
Very good
thank you.
point. Yeah.
Excellent. So I can see Taqwa Jandubi. This is the last question, perhaps. Taqwa.
So, considering the COVID-19 situation, I believe you've been made to experience a new situation of working at home. So, did this experience offer any surprising advantages or disadvantages? And if so, do you recommend others to work as conference interpreters or working from home as telephone interpreters? And thank you.
Okay. I think telephone interpreting is a totally different category of interpreting. I think that's something, you know, which is completely aside. It's maybe the sort of thing that is being used by health services, where a doctor has a patient, they need somebody to translate for them, you know, on the spot, they phone up an interpreting service and they use that. I think that the work that we do, be it online or be it face-to-face, is exactly the same work. I would say that it's always preferable to work face-to-face. I think that's something which won't go away. I think that when we're out of the whole COVID-19 crisis, we will have meetings again. I think a lot of the smaller meetings will move to a virtual forum, and the big 5-day medical meetings, legal meetings, or whatever will still happen. So I think we're going to have a combined existence where some of the time we're working from home, and less of the time than before we'll be going to big meetings all over the world, just as we do now.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you all for your questions, for your active participation. Special thanks to Beatrice also for being with us today. Professor Mansouri, Iman, Salwa, and the other guests, and also special thanks to my students. We have discussed a subject that is really very timely. We are still experiencing the drawbacks of COVID-19 and the lockdown and everything. And as a community of interpreters, we need to meet from now and then to discuss issues related to our profession and how to act. We perhaps came to some understanding or common understanding about what should be done, perhaps what should be done if you receive an offer, and how to price your services, how to act as a remote simultaneous interpreter. What are the pros? What are the cons of working from home? There are so many perhaps disadvantages, like the interference between the private space and the professional space, and how to manage that, to keep everything separate. Sometimes you might have, like Tony, a special room for that, but sometimes it's not enough. You need to feed the dog of your neighbor to do your job properly. So these are the questions that we need to discuss more. So I would like to reiterate my thanks and gratitude to you, Tony, for accepting our invitation and being a distinguished speaker this evening in this encounter. It is still, just to remind you, that it is part of a whole series of encounters called Encounters at the Shores of Translation. The encounters are not over. There will be another encounter very shortly, I think in 20 minutes. Yes, so just the time to refresh and refresh ourselves. It will be with another guest speaker, Philip Toner, who will be speaking about translation as interpretation, and he will be taking Bible translation as a case study. Thank you very much, and hope to see you in a while. Thank you, Tony, again.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I wish everyone much luck in their future careers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tony. Thank you, Dr. Hammouda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tony.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.